Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something genuinely fascinating. We're unpacking a highly intimate recent roundtable hosted by 4BC Brisbane. Now, this wasn't your standard rehearsed press conference. Instead, two everyday swing voters, Astrid and Tina, sat down to directly interrogate Queensland Senator Pauline Hanson. It's a pretty rare and revealing format. Today, we are going to unpack the exact policy diagnoses and solutions that emerged from this totally unvarnished conversation, purely looking at the facts.
The host of the broadcast actually pointed out that Hanson was sitting literally 20 centimeters away from one of the listeners. You just don't get that kind of face-to-face access to political leaders very often, do you? Because of this setup, the conversation got incredibly personal and direct. Let's sift through that passionate debate and break it down into clear, thematic pillars so we can understand exactly what was being argued.
Okay, here's how we're breaking this down today. We've just covered the setup, so we're going to jump straight into economy and housing, followed by reining in government waste, navigating healthcare gaps, and finally, national defense and energy.
Let's get right into part one, economy and housing.
This part of the discussion kicked off immediately with pressing household concerns. Astrid, one of our swing voters, posed a super direct question. She noted that her own family comes from a proud migrant background, but she really wanted to know, how do we balance current migration levels with the massive pressure on housing, infrastructure, and public services? She highlighted a struggle I think a lot of us can relate to right now. A medium-income family earning around $93,000 a year just trying to scrape together $60,000 for a deposit on a medium-priced home. It's incredibly tough in today's climate.
Hanson argues that the current system is fundamentally unbalanced. If we look at the recent intake, we saw 739,000 migrants arrive in just a single year. Hanson contrasts that massive spike with the John Howard era, which historically hovered around 80,000 to 100,000. Her proposed policy is to strictly cap migration at 130,000. She actually refers to the current high migration strategy as a Ponzi scheme, designed by the government to artificially prop up the GDP, which she claims drastically exacerbates the housing shortage and leaves everyday Australians living in tents or cars.
She also zeroed in on exactly who is coming in through the skilled migration intake. Out of roughly 51,600 skilled migrants brought in, only 1,800 were actually in the construction industry. So the core of her argument is pretty straightforward. Bringing in a huge number of people without a proportional number of builders doesn't solve the housing supply issue. It literally just fuels the demand.
To address this, Hanson outlined a highly specific three-step policy roadmap. Step 1 is cutting migration to 130,000 to instantly cool down demand. Step 2 involves pulling back heavily on foreign investment in housing to ensure established homes aren't bought up by overseas buyers who just leave the properties vacant. And Step 3 is aimed directly at helping the struggling building sector, completely removing the GST on building materials for new homes up to $1 million for a period of 5 years. She argues this will drastically bring down the cost of building and help out builders who are locked into old, unviable contracts because of inflation.
All right, moving on to part two, reining in government waste. Tina, the other swing voter, really drove this next section, voicing deep frustrations about government mismanagement and politicians' excessive travel entitlements. But look at the sheer scale of this number. $52 billion. That is the current annual cost of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or NDIS. Hanson claims this is expected to blow out to a staggering $100 billion a year by 2032. She pointed out that the scheme was originally only projected to cover 410,000 people, but it currently sits closer to 780,000.
Hanson argues the system is just bleeding money due to a severe lack of oversight. Take this staggering comparison. Getting a simple lawn mowed might normally cost you $80 to $100 an hour. But when billed through the NDIS, providers are apparently claiming up to $195 an hour for cutting the exact same grass. She cited specific stories of unregistered providers exploiting the system to buy luxury cars and corporate footy tickets, arguing that the government is simply too afraid of losing votes to step in and properly audit them.
Expanding on that theme of waste, Hanson outlined an aggressive strategy to cut $90 billion in government spending every single year. Her proposed targets are sweeping and highly controversial. She aims to entirely abolish the Climate Change Department, remove what she terms Aboriginal industry funding in an effort to treat everyone equally, defund the Therapeutic Goods Administration, drastically reduce the number of public servants across the board, and, of course, aggressively audit those NDIS provider scams.
Next up is part 3, navigating healthcare gaps.
This portion of the interrogation shifted into incredibly emotional territory. Tina anchored this section with a deeply personal story. Back in January, her son was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. The required treatment involved a 40-year-old, highly effective off-patent drug. But here's the catch. Because it's off-patent and cheap, no pharmaceutical company will sponsor it to be put on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. Even with private health insurance, Tina's family had to pay for it entirely out of pocket. Thankfully, her son entered remission just days before this interview. But her question highlighted a massive structural gap. There is no government pathway to fund older, proven medicines without relying on corporate sponsorship. Hanson strongly agreed with this, committing to advocate for a better system that completely bypasses pharmaceutical greed.
Broadening out to structural healthcare solutions, Hanson proposed two major changes. First, rather than the federal government sending money to state administrations, which she claims skimmed 20% right off the top, she wants to fund local hospital boards directly. Second, she wants to heavily incentivize the use of Australia's 360-day hospitals. She explained that these facilities are drastically underutilized right now, and they can perform same-day procedures for literally half the price of booking into a massive public hospital. For everyday patients, she argues this means getting faster care at a fraction of the cost to the taxpayer.
The discussion then pivoted to tackle a highly charged cultural and medical issue, which came via a listener's text about puberty blockers. Hanson outlined a very strict stance here. She fully supports maintaining the ban on transgender treatments for minors in Queensland. She argued that these are irreversible decisions that should wait until the brain is fully developed at age 25 or at the absolute minimum age 18. She cited instances of regret and harm, stating that Australia should hit pause on these treatments entirely while long-term international reports, like the ones coming out of the UK, are finalized.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, National Defense and Energy.
This final segment expanded our view outward to a pretty unstable global landscape. Astrid posed a really heavy-hitting prompt. Looking at the global conflicts in Iran, Gaza, and the looming threat regarding Taiwan, she basically asked, what role should a nation like Australia realistically play? How do we balance our humanitarian and diplomatic responsibilities with our own national interests and defense capabilities? This actually led to a fascinating moment of strong, unified agreement across the table. Both the swing voters and the senator universally agreed that Australia has pushed way too many kids into university degrees, which just results in massive HEEC and a serious lack of practical skills. Instead, they championed non-traditional pathways to build up our domestic resilience. Tina shared that her son actually skipped university to join the Defense Force, while Astrid's daughter is currently an Air Force cadet. Hanson strongly advocated for expanding programs like the Defense Force Gap Year and pushing youth toward trades to rebuild Australia's self-sufficiency.
So, how does Hanson tie all these international threads together? Well, while she admits Australia currently lacks independent military assets, she firmly supports the U.S. alliance and AUKUS, arguing that you have to stand by your mates. However, she draws a very hard line at foreign conflicts, stating she wants absolutely no Australian boots on the ground in places like Iran. And crucially, to fuel this push for national independence, her energy policy is incredibly simple. Drill domestic gas, reject green taxes, and use Australia's vast fossil fuel resources to aggressively pay down the national debt and ensure our own energy security. From housing to healthcare, from government waste to military alliances, Hanson's pitch is essentially a radical return to nationalistic self-sufficiency. But it leaves us with a really critical question to ponder. In an increasingly unstable world, how do we effectively balance a desire for domestic self-reliance with the unavoidable realities and responsibilities of a deeply interconnected global landscape? That's the big question we're left with today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.